Throughout the ages, one continent has determined the trajectory of human history. Her inhabitants gained power, progress, and wealth on a scale never witnessed before. As they established elaborate trade networks and vast empires, the people of this continent achieved almost complete world domination. Their ingenuity and wisdom resounds in all corners of the planet. We are those people. And our continent is called Europe. Together, our nations constitute the greatest civilization ever brought forth by man. It is a civilization that stretches across time, from classical antiquity through the Middle Ages and the Enlightenment into the present. Our continent is the cradle of the modern world, the birthplace of humanity's most splendid inventions and innovations. Despite frequently struggling against one another, Europeans managed to chart Earth's great land masses, spreading civilization around the globe. The vast majority of countries around the world were created under our influence. Europe has overcome two massive conflicts, decades of division, and the loss of its empires, and is currently more free and united than it ever has been before in history. Nevertheless, our unity is constantly threatened by the enemies of reason and civilization. Plagued by division and surrounded by dictatorships and barbarianism, we must be prepared to defend our way of life. Europe is an enlightened flame in a dark and savage world. Stand up to protect our continent, our culture, and our civilization.
So what does it mean to be pro-European? I'm going to boil it down to the core, to the simplest, purest meaning. To be pro-European means you support the right of European people to exist in their own nations without forcefully becoming a minority, hence replaced by non-Europeans. It's really basic. You either support the right of white people to have self-determination as a group without outside interference, or you don't. You either want them replaced and eradicated from the planet, or you don't. To be pro-white means you want European nations to remain European. Each ethnic group and each race should be pro their own people. It means you, as an ethnically European person, understand that you share a unique bond with those whom you are genetically related to. You understand that you have a shared history, culture, and ancestry with your folk. In order to remain a people and uphold your customs, you need your own space and you need to remain the majority. It's been this way since the beginning of time.
Human accomplishment really goes back to a question that was first asked by a Roman historian 2,000 years ago when he was trying to explain why it is that you have a phenomenon such as Athens during the Periclean age and following that Aristotle, Plato, and so forth. Because even then it was so obvious that something strange had happened to produce in one time and place so much towering achievement by a very small population of people. I have another way of describing what's required, and that is that a stream of great accomplishment is facilitated when the scientists and artists have de facto freedom of action. I mean, if you have an Aristotle in one generation, you're a lot more likely to have interesting philosophy being done in the next generation than if you don't. And if you have Michelangelo and Leonardo both painting at the same time in Florence, guess what? It's a lot more likely you're going to end up with emulators of those who also produce good work until that is exhausted. A major stream of human accomplishment is fostered by a culture in which the most talented people believe that life has a purpose and that the function of life is to fulfill that purpose.
So it does get a little tired, Charlie. I mean, I'd ask you to go back through history and figure out where are these contributions that have been made by these other categories of people that you're talking about. Where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization?
Than white people?
Than Western civilization itself, that's rooted in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the United States of America, and every place where the footprint of Christianity settled the world. That's all of Western civilization.
What about Asia? I don't want to sit here and argue in favor of philanthropy. We're not going to argue.
We built the modern world.
Who?
Europeans.
Europeans.
Built the modern world.
European?
We invented science and industry. We invented science and industry, and you want to tell us to stop because, oh my God, we're so bad. We invented the modern world.
I feel you. You're so dumb.
We invented the modern world.
You fucking degenerate.
We saved billions of people from starvation.
Are you joking me?
We built modern civilization. White people are the best thing that ever happened to the world. We are so amazing, and I love myself, and I love white people.
Say that one more time.
Fuck yeah, white people.
Say it right here.
Fuck yeah, white men. We're white men. We did everything. Look, I don't hate other people. I just love white men. God. I just love white men.
It's going to be uncomfortable for some of you, but you have to face the fact that trains, planes, cars, rockets, telescopes, tires, telephones, radios, television, electricity, atomic energy, computers, and fax machines are all miracles made possible by the minds and spirits of men with names like Ampere, Bell, Caselli, Edison, Ohm, Faraday, Einstein, Cohen, Teller, Shockley, Hertz, Marconi, Morse, Popov, Ford, Volta, Michelin, Dunlop, Watt, Diesel, Galileo, and other dead white males. And many of you on the radical left don't understand what I'm about to say, because it's tantamount to blasphemy in this politically insane day and age. But truth is truth, my friends. How long are we going to ignore this? How are we going to ignore this? How much longer can we ignore it? How much longer can we listen to these gangsters who keep screaming about inequality, which is just a code word for taking from those who earn and give it to those who don't work or don't want to work? The great majority of booms, past and present, have been brought about by the genius and inventiveness of that most targeted of genders, the dreaded white male. Now, this is not to discredit the many contributions coming from non-whites, but fact is fact. Our most important and consequential inventions have come almost exclusively from white males. Curse me if you will, but you won't change anything by cursing me. But if you call me a liar, you'll have to come up with the proof that I'm lying. But the facts tell us that many of the great men pursued their genius at great personal risk, such as the astronomer Galileo, who proved that the earth revolves around the sun. See, he and other men of genius and courage refused to be suppressed, even if it meant their lives. They would permit no race, gender, group, or class to keep them from their pursuit of truth and excellence, whatever the cost. They were the ultimate minorities. At the end of the day, it didn't matter whether they were Europeans in a European nation. They were the ultimate minorities, and they were threatened with death for saying that the earth revolves around the sun. See what happens, my friends, if you eliminate, suppress, or debase the white male. You will kill the goose that laid the golden egg. If you ace out the white male with affirmative action, exile him from the family, teach him that he's a blight on mankind, then bon voyage to our society. We will devolve into a third world cesspool. Where has there ever before in history been a group of human beings who have brought about the likes of the Magna Carta, the U.S. Constitution, and the countless life-saving and life-improving inventions that we now enjoy?
The salient feature of the 20th century was the collective suicide of the white race. In 1900, we ruled the world. We ruled politically, militarily, culturally, economically, scientifically, and in every other way. No other race even came close. We ruled India and Africa directly, and China was for all practical purposes an economic colony of Europe and America. Japan was the only non-white nation of any significance which even had pretensions of autonomy. We had superior weapons, superior armed forces, superior communications, superior transportation, superior agriculture and industry, superior standards of health, superiority in every facet of science and technology. We had the best universities, really the only universities worthy of the name, the best engineers. We built things that other races couldn't even imagine. We explored. We conquered. We ruled. More important than anything else was our moral superiority. I don't mean that we were meek and inoffensive and turned to the other cheek. I mean that we were proud and self-confident. We knew who we were, and we knew that we were far, far better than anyone else, and we weren't at all embarrassed that we were better. We recognized racial differences in the same way we recognized that the sun rises in the east, and we felt not the slightest need to apologize to anyone for that. Egalitarianism was a moral and mental disease that afflicted only a few of our people, despite the murderous outburst of egalitarian insanity that was the French Revolution a century earlier. Any sort of racial mixing was abhorrent to us. We looked on miscegenation with the same disgust as on bestiality or necrophilia. We didn't tolerate it, and we didn't accept or trust Jews.
The European and Christian core of our country is shrinking, while mass immigration is altering forever the face of America. Patrick J. Buchanan is the author of more than 10 books. His most recent book, Suicide of a Superpower. Pat, welcome. Civilizations die from suicide,
right,
not by murder. We'll come to the argument by argument in the book, but why do you lead the book with that quotation?
Well, because I think the West is disintegrating. It's the greatest civilization the world has ever produced, and I think it is dying. Take a look at what happened from the day, for example, my father was born in 1905. Western empires controlled the entire world, with the addition of Japan and Asia, 6 or 7 countries, America included, controlled the entire world. We went through 2 world wars that carried off something like 100 million people, most of them Western peoples. And as a consequence, I think all these Western nations, they all lost their empires. Almost all have lost their armies and navies. They have lost their basic fundamental Christian faith. Certainly Europe, the Pope says, is a desert of godlessness. And as they have lost that, their culture has begun to disintegrate and the people have begun to die. There's not a single Western nation whose native-born population has a birth rate that will enable it to stay in its present form through this century.
What is it about current immigration that's alarming as opposed to past immigrations?
Well, the past immigrations, let's take the large immigration that came in from 1890 to 1920. Those were folks, the Irish came in, of course, 1845 to 1849, the potato famine, huge numbers of them. Germans began coming in later in the century. And then you had the folks from Italy, from Poland, from Slovakia, Jews from Russia and the Pale of Settlement. And all of those folks came into this country basically by 1924, when the immigration restrictions were imposed. And this terrified Woodrow Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt. However, we did have a melting pot then. One of the major elements of it was the parochial and public schools, which took these kids who didn't speak the language, and many of them came from broken families, and dropped them, immersed them into America's popular culture and higher culture. They learned American literature, the American language, American history, American heroes, holidays, so that by 1960, 97% of the people in this country all spoke the English language. We all had basically the same Judeo-Christian values. 95% of the country was predominant, overwhelmingly Christian. African Americans were the most churched and Christianized of all. And so we had one country, one nation, one people. And it was an incredible achievement. In this day and age, if you're not called some names, and you've been in journalism as long as I have, then you probably haven't said anything very much worthwhile, in my judgment. I mean, because of the nature and character where the country is going. What are all these terms, racist, sexist, homophobic? They all say, they're all the same thing. They're synonyms for heretic. And what I am is a heretic to the conventional wisdom as it moves further and further left, and you're more and more outside. Things in that, I mean, my views in that book, many of them would not even have been controversial had they been written a while ago.
Within the Democratic Party, John Kennedy could have read all this. And
sure, I mean, but I think the country is moving this way,
right.
And I don't like where it's going. And I think what I've said in that book, I wouldn't take back a single word. And the people that don't like the book, they have not told me exactly what they don't like. I said, well, listen, of course we could redact something if you guys like in the paperback, but they won't tell me the paragraph. They don't like that title, End of White America, or End of White America. What is the problem with that?
Right, that's a chapter title, but you got it from the Atlantic or from some magazine.
Well, that's the cover of the Atlantic magazine, right. But you got all these columnists saying it. Isn't going to be great in 2042 when the European or white population's in a minority? And I asked myself, hey, wait a minute. When people that look like me are in a minority, we're going to be a better country? Why? And what that book says is, I've come to the conclusion we ain't never going to get back the unity and the cohesion and the sense of one nation, one people under God that we had then.
What do you make of British culture now, particularly after the riots that we've seen?
I'm not sure what's going on in Britain. Or let me say this, I don't know what's going on in London, because London is no longer an English city, and that's how they got the Olympics. I mean, they said we're the most cosmopolitan city on earth, but it doesn't feel English. I had a Californian friend come over 2 months ago, walked down the King's Road and said to me, well, where are all the English people? And I mean, I love having different cultures around, but when the parent culture kind of dissipates, you're left thinking, well, what's going on?
И в вашей стране, во всех европейских странах, и в России существует большая проблема, связанная с народонаселением. Демографическая проблема. Рождаемость низкая. Вымирают европейцы, вы понимаете это или нет?
The number of people who class themselves as white British is now a minority in London.
People who identify as white British citizens are now a minority in their capital cities.
White folks are on track to becoming, and I hate to say this, the minority in America.
A new report out by the government shows that by the year 2042, white Americans will no longer represent the majority of the population.
Children from white families in Birmingham are set to become a minority group for the first time when this year's census is collected in March.
The latest census suggests white British born are now in a minority.
Census Bureau says whites will be a minority.
Californians know a thing or two about demographic change. 70% of all state school pupils in Los Angeles are Hispanic.
For the first time in American history, non-whites will make up half or more of the next generation, according to a new study by the Pew Research Center.
The latest census suggests that white Brits are now in a minority in London.
And the fact that we are going to become a minority in our own country before 2050, well before 2050 for the younger people.
So let's break this down again. You have forced mass non-white immigration into white countries, and only white countries. Upon this, we have the government forcing integration to all white living spaces within the country. And then they promote miscegenation all day and all night while demonizing everything that is traditional or white. It's genocide.
You can't have something like that without a plan. There has to be an agenda. You're not going to accidentally try to make China non-Chinese.
The UN definition of genocide is A. Killing members of the group. B. Causing serious bodily or mental harm to members of the group. C. Deliberately inflicting on the group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. D. Imposing measures intended to prevent births within the group. E. Forcibly transferring children of the group to another group.
Replacement fertility is the number of childbirths per woman that is required to replace the existing population.
Why is this aging and why is this demographic winter occurring?
When fewer children are born, there are proportionately more elderly. This is called an aging population.
The world for the last 200 years has been population increases pretty much in all countries. So that's the challenge, to try to first understand why it's happening and then some consequences.
Now the rest of you whites in Britain, Europe and America, your crime now is that you aren't diversified enough. You are too white. I believe that white people globally have been lied to, misled and targeted specifically for destruction, but it's been a gradual program. Whether you call it cultural Marxism or whatever it is, there's been a program to lie to white people on a grand scale. And it's almost shocking the extent of the lies that whites have been brought to believe, and that their governments and officials openly state as facts, which are not so. And I've come to regard liberalism as the biggest con job intended to destroy white people.
See our diversity in America not as something to fear, but as something to welcome, because it's a source of our national strength.
Ours is the party of inclusion, a party that believes this nation draws its strength from its diversity.
Diversity is the Democratic Party's greatest strength.
Our diversity is our strength. Republicans have their way. Maria will be deported.
We think the diversity is the strength of the Republican Party.
Diversity is our strength.
Our diversity is our strength.
Diversity is our strength.
This diversity is our strength.
Diversity is our strength.
Diversity, which is our strength.
Our diversity is our strength.
Diversity is our strength.
Our country's strength is our diversity. It's not our weakness.
Our diversity is our strength.
Our diversity is a strength and a blessing.
Diversity is one of our great strengths.
Diversity is one of our greatest strengths.
Diversity is our greatest strength. Our diversity is our greatest strength.
One of the greatest strengths of our nation is its diversity.
The diversity of our country is our greatest strength.
You know, there is a whole host of beliefs in the United States today that I would categorize as so obviously wrong and stupid that only very, very intelligent people could persuade themselves that they're true. And one of them, I would say, is the idea that diversity is a great gift for America. Diversity of the kind we're all supposed to be celebrating, whether it's religious or racial or linguistic or cultural, all of that, they are sources of tension and conflict all around the world, wherever you look. People are slaughtering each other with great diligence because diverse people are trying to share the same territory. And for us to think that that's a strength of the United States, it's completely cuckoo. If you look at American history of the last 50 years, whites have treated minorities with the kind of munificence and a kind of generosity that is unprecedented in the history of the world. Whites are still the majority in this country, and yet whites have instituted institutions that discriminate against their own people. If you want to apply to an Ivy League college or even to a state university or a community college, do you think you're better off being a white male or a black female? The notion that race doesn't really exist, that when you see a black person and an Asian person, that's some sort of sociological optical illusion, that doesn't really exist. Race doesn't exist. Everybody knows race exists. People behave on the basis of race all the time, but we're supposed to pretend it doesn't exist.
What's wrong with diversity? I don't get the point.
My point is that this is a word that has become magic. What does it mean, if anything? Are you saying to me that all black people are alike, therefore you've got to mix and match by race? It's not diverse unless it's diverse along these dimensions. But now we're getting away from the whole racial thing. I'm saying the racial thing has been used as a proxy for something that is not a proxy for. Because the vast majority of blacks who go to places like Harvard and Cornell and Stanford are not blacks from the ghetto. Those are blacks from out there. You know, they're from Malibu. They're from the very same neighborhoods as the whites are there. And so now you call it diversity.
All right.
Google diversity increases social cohesion. Click. Oh, wait, well, that can't be right. Does diversity erode social cohesion? Increased diversity in 2017 may result in more frequent incidents of social fragmentation. Increased immigration and diversity reduced trust. The modern nation states were formed around ethnicity, language, and culture. This is why there is a Thailand made of Thais, and a Japan made of Japanese, and a Denmark made of Danes. As well, the currently functional colonial states, Canada, the US, Australia, were all built around the idea of ethnocentrism, and if we want to be honest, as was formerly functional and prosperous, but now sliding into failed state status, South Africa. And very interestingly, in all of these countries, policies that were meant to build nation states with a unified racial composition were all overturned within a few years of each other in the 1960s, with South Africa and Rhodesia fighting a rearguard action and ultimately joining the other Anglosphere nations as late as the 1990s. Harvard professor Robert Putnam, a typical hardcore leftist professor who conducted a study to support his pro-multicultural agenda because he thought the data would support his egalitarian fantasies about all the wonderful benefits of diversity, only ended up with the inescapable conclusion that diversity destroys trust and fractures communities, forcing people to hunker down. His liberal sensibilities were so hurt by this he waited years to publish his findings. The policy of multiculturalism and diversity is based on emotionalism and ideology, not reality, historical precedent, or even common sense, and the destructive effects of diversity that's rooted in our ever-feminized civilization is getting harder and harder to cover up. For example, in a longitude study, ironically from the University of Cologne, a city that recently gained infamy for the mass sexual assaults by migrants,
Wenn man einem Ausländer sagt, er soll mich nicht als Bitch beschimpfen. Wenn man einem Ausländer sagt, er soll mich nicht anglotzen, Alter, und mich mit seinen... Ach, es ist Deutschland. Hier werden Frauen geschlagen, hier werden Kinder geschändet und entführt. Und man wird angeglotzt.
Som der ganske plejer at gøre. Og så skulle vi ned til den store sø, fordi det er så godt vejr. Så det, at der kommer 4 gutter hen og smadrer mig ned i jorden. Og begyndte at sparke til mig.
Eine Immigrantengruppe, die war recht groß. Und die haben mich so angeschaut, so angestarrt, haben irgendwas zueinander geflüstert und gegangen. Und wirklich, ich habe gebeten, dass ich heil und munter nach Hause komme. Und das ist jetzt nur eine kleine Nachricht für die Männer. Tut eure Kinder und tut eure Frau.
Jij had net één dingetje dat je zei van hier, daarom vind ik het hier niet leuk.
Asielzoekers.
Ja, asielzoekers?
Ja.
Wat is daar dan niet leuk aan?
Gewoon. Ze kijken je aan en vieze gebaren naar je toe.
Vieze?
Gebaren. En,
wat is dat?
Ja, van het knipogen en alles. Nou, dat is toch niet fijn als je dat van een neger krijgt?
Waarom niet?
Nou, dat is...
Nou zeg.
Ja, nou,
dat zijn ook mensen.
Ja, nou en? En wat voor mensen?
So you have a country, you have resources, you have people living in the country, you have borders, you have security, you have control. Why, logically, would anyone allow hundreds of thousands of refugees to come over into your country, to live off of your social welfare programs, to increase crime, to increase horrible crimes like rape, and to, honestly, quite frankly, take over your culture? Now, 100 years ago, a group of women got together and said women needed to vote. Another group of women got together and said women should not vote, and there's a lot of reasons why. We waste our votes. In general, women waste our votes. We're the ones voting for social welfare programs. We're the ones that have increased social welfare programs, and we're the ones that are voting to, open borders and let migrants in, whatever country we're talking about, Europe or America. We're the ones that vote our emotions because we're emotional creatures. That's bad because you can't have too much of one thing. There's a natural balance. There's a natural balance between the masculine and the feminine. And when you have too much of one thing, when you have too much emotions and you have too much nurturing, it gets bad because guess what? The fact of the matter is you cannot nurture the world. You cannot take the millions and billions of people living in poverty in the world, feminine strengths, which are to love and to nurture, work wonderful within the family structure, and they work wonderful at those jobs that women are naturally really good at. Years and years and years and years and years ago, we were done, we were good, we were equal. We were equal before all of that crap. Amelia Earhart didn't want to be a mom, she didn't want to be like a wife, she didn't want to have long hair, she was not a lesbian, people think she was, she totally wasn't. She wanted to fly planes, she wanted to have adventures, She did, and so did the other 98 women that joined her 99 Women's Club of aviation. Aviation was brand new. We think it was dominated by men. Most men were flyers, sure, it's a male thing. But women who wanted to be flyers were allowed to. We were allowed to before feminism. These refugees, migrants, invaders, are mostly male. There are diseases. They're trashing places. They're causing crime, riot. They're spitting, they're throwing rocks. Shut the door. European men, I'm going to address this to you. Ich kann ein bisschen auf Deutsch sprechen, okay? Shut the door. Schließen die Tür.
I'm right now at an airport, at an airplane, and there's a person getting deported to Afghanistan. Please don't take my phone, don't touch my phone. 2 years old that is going to get deported to Afghanistan, where he will most likely get killed. So I'm at the airport, and the people working here were trying to take away my phone. So as I said before, Ismail is not on this plane. It's an...
Bu karar benim değil şu anda.
Tamam, pilot bey mi veriyor? Kim veriyorsa versin onlara.
Thank you.
Aynı düşüncede.
When I say women weaken nations, I'm not saying that women are not essential for a nation's survival or well-being. Of course they are. Women bear the children for the nation's future and survival, and they bring essential balance and nurturing to the life of a people. And neither am I saying that women cannot have brilliant and satisfying careers in whatever field they have talent for. But my point is that, regardless of outliers, which always exist, there are key differences between men and women. And any healthy nation must maintain this tricky balance between masculine and feminine to stay strong and healthy. The modern West has lost sight of this, and just look at the results. In broad terms, men and women certainly think differently on average. As far as the reasons why they do is concerned, the research splits into 3 basic areas: biological, cognitive, and socio-cultural. And there is certainly scientific evidence of sexual differences in each of these areas. But regardless of the reason for the difference, what really matters is that there is a difference. Even more important are the different voting patterns between the sexes. We know that in every Western country from the US to Sweden, voting patterns between the sexes are remarkably consistent. If only men voted, we would likely never have a social democratic government ever again. And if only women voted, goodbye nationalism forever. Men are more cautious and given to the protection of the tribe and the borders of the country, while women favour the more nurturing, trusting and open approach to people. It's a sad, long and painful lesson our civilization is being taught right now, that the sexes are simply different. Men's and women's roles are completely equal in importance and should be valued and respected as such. In our demented modern world, equality has come to mean that women should want to be engineers or soldiers, and that men should want to stay at home and look after the kids or become nurses. But even when they choose to have careers, women make very different choices to men, which befit their natural inclinations and talents. The fact is that no matter how much social engineering the left tries, it can't make engineers out of women in any significant number. When women do try to enter STEM fields, for example, they often find that they are simply unsuited to these ways of thinking. They get depressed and frustrated. Maybe their abilities in these areas can be improved with practice, but that is not the same as natural inclinations or preferences. In this documentary, the BBC found one of the last entirely white schools in England to try to indoctrinate some children into believing that there are no differences between boys and girls. It's being marketed under the hashtag #NoMoreBoysAndGirls. Just imagine if they had tried to get away with this in a Muslim school. Leftists might be crazy, but they're not suicidal. What we see in this program is the left, as it always does, try to manipulate the children to conform to its vision of how the world should be, not how it is, just like it did in the Soviet Union, Mao's China, and the many other societies it brought to bloody destruction. By showing the children exceptional cases of female mechanics and male makeup artists, they are trying to fool the children into believing that these things are the norm, and that, if they have natural, traditional inclinations, to think they are baseless. They say in the program that men's and women's brains have exactly the same structure, but this is simply not true, and they don't address the size difference, and they won't acknowledge the role of the different sex hormones. See how frustrated the presenter, Dr. Javid Abdelmonaim, becomes when the girls and boys just aren't the same. Of course, the one hypothesis that never occurs to Dr. Abdelmonaim is that boys and girls are just different.
Lots of you will recognise this image, which was making the rounds on social media lately. It's a disco onesie modelled by an 8-year-old boy called Nemis, known to his fans by his drag name, Lactatia. Lactatia was first thrust into the public eye when she appeared on stage with Drag Race winner Bianca Del Rio.
You're fucking adorable, Lactatia! And is this your first time in drag?
Not really.
She recently also appeared in a video for Elle.com, joined by her mother and another drag star, Vivacious, who also appeared in RuPaul's Drag Race.
There you go! Diva in the making. I love it! It's because of people like you that I'm here. You are my replacement.
The controversy was largely down to the fact that most people feel uncomfortable seeing a child looking and behaving like an adult. But upon further inspection, it was soon discovered that the clothing line, the House of Man, owned by designer Brandon Hilton, also sells fetish clothing such as PVC underwear, body harnesses, and nipple tassels.
People just aren't accepting of it right now, but these kids know themselves, they're sure of themselves, they pick their outfits, they do their makeup, and I think it's beautiful that they're able to be themselves.
Another famous drag queen star is Desmond is Amazing. Desmond first made the rounds online after videos of him twerking at a gay pride parade in Brooklyn went viral.
Huck magazine recently published this picture. Now that picture is a 10-year-old drag kid next to a transgender man. And the media is silent. They're not saying a word. After we just saw the fiasco of the other drag child, I believe Evan Almighty, I don't know what his name is, and he's up in New York at a gay bar, stripping on stage, full-grown adult men throwing dollar bills at this child. He's 10 years old. Nobody says a word. Perfectly acceptable. You can preach tolerance, you can preach acceptance, you can preach celebration, but what you cannot preach is the sexualization of children. That is where you draw the line. It is pedophilia at its finest. This kid doesn't even know what sexuality is. He is a product of his environment. His parents are using and manipulating this child to push their liberal progressive beliefs and ideologies. This kid is being used as a pawn. He's going to grow up to be so twisted in the head because he was not allowed to be a child. Instead, he had somebody else's values rammed down his throat. Because if you are so for the idea of letting your children choose their gender, why do you cram this political ideology or this sexual idea down their throat? Why can't they just grow up and be themselves? No, because if we brainwash the youth, well then they grow up and embrace that, and it becomes normalized to them. You can never normalize sexualizing a 10-year-old.
This is an identity issue that we're talking about here in young children that I personally can identify with. As a young child, I wanted nothing to do with femininity, and I wanted to literally dress like a male, and I would sneak clothes to kindergarten that were masculine so that I didn't have to wear feminine clothes. And there is an agenda behind this gender neutral movement. It's a continuum. It's not just about saying, let boys choose to wear pink or blue and let's do the same for girls. And it's bigger than that. It's about sexualizing children. And if you say, what in the world? What is the connection? Because the inference there is that in order to allow a child to come into his or her identity, and then children get to explore sexual themes. And if you don't believe me, I want to bring up a circumstance that happened recently. There's an adorable, adorable young man who, when I say young, he is 11 years old, and his name is Desmond. He's known as Desmond is Amazing. That's his drag kid name. Yes, you heard me correctly. He has identified as being a drag kid, and he dresses extremely feminine, and he's become the poster child for the LGBT movement. And this is extremely concerning on multiple levels. Desmond was allowed by his parents and other adults to go to a bar. It happened to be a gay bar, but to me, gay or straight, this is so inappropriate. He danced on stage, no shirt on, from the footage I saw. He had no shirt on, and they were, the men at the bar were throwing money at him as if he's a stripper. Parenting is a protective role. It's also a role where we impart identity. Let me give you some examples of being protective. If my son, if I told him you can eat whatever you want to eat, he would survive on Oreos. If I told him, hey, I want to honor your desire to sleep and be awake when you want, he would be up all night and sleep all day. As a parent, for the same reason that I would never turn the keys to the car on and put my little 8-year-old son behind the wheel and say, drive, be free, I support your freedom. No, that is not protecting him. Would he want to drive? Absolutely. Who cares that his foot can barely touch the pedal and he can barely see over the wheel? He would want to drive. But as a parent, I protect him. He doesn't know the laws of the road and the traffic laws, okay? I am praying for Desmond. He is an awesome young man. He's just swept up in a culture that is not healthy right now. I'm praying for his parents.
This killer asked Josh for a ride home, and in the video you can see Josh shaking his head, yeah. And then Josh went inside the building and turned around and held the door open for Mr. Morales to walk in. He said something to Josh, and Josh went, which we later found out he wasn't going to school. So Josh just closed the door, allowed the door to close, and walks out of the frame, headed to class. Last time I'll ever see my son walk, talk, anything about him. I didn't bring my kid across that border. If I would have told my daughter, I'm going to Mexico, and had a man, he'll bring you over here in a year or two, I'd be charged with neglect as well as I should be. I did not put my kid in harm's way when he went to school that day. You did. Every one of you is elected by an American. It is time for you to stand in the gap for Americans.
She was 21. She had just graduated from Bellevue University with a 4.0. The night of January 31st, 2016, as she was coming home, she was rear-ended by Eswin Mejia, who was 19 years old, here illegally.
Mein Name ist Maria. Mein Name ist Ebba.
Mein Name ist Mia.
Mein Name ist Maria.
Mein Name ist Ebba. Ich wurde in Kandel erstochen. Ich wurde in Malmö vergewaltigt.
Ich wurde in Rotherham missbraucht. Und ich wurde in Stockholm überfahren.
Es dauerte stundenlang. Keiner war da, um mir zu helfen.
Ich bin irgendeine Frau.
Ich bin Mia, Maria und Ebba.
Sie könnten ich sein und ich könnte sie sein.
Sie könnten ich sein und ich könnte sie sein.
Die Täter lauern überall.
Wenn wir im Park joggen gehen,
wenn wir abends von der Arbeit nach Hause kommen,
wenn wir an der Bushaltestelle warten.
Wir sind nicht sicher, weil ihr uns nicht schützt.
Weil ihr euch weigert, unsere Grenzen zu sichern.
Weil ihr euch weigert zu kontrollieren, wer hereinkommt.
Weil ihr euch weigert, Straftäter abzuschieben.
Weil ihr lieber jede Kritik an euch zensiert, als uns ernst zu nehmen.
Weil ihr uns lieber sterben lasst, als eure Fehler einzuräumen.
Wegen eurer Zuwanderungspolitik stehen wir bald einer Mehrheit von jungen Männern aus archaischen, frauenfeindlichen Gesellschaften gegenüber. Ihr habt das gewusst und ihr habt das in Kauf genommen.
Ihr habt das gewusst. Ihr habt es in Kauf genommen. Ihr habt uns preisgegeben. Ihr habt uns geopfert.
Ihr predigt Feminismus und Frauenrechte. Dabei seid ihr die wahren Frauenfeinde.
Wir sind die Erinnerung an die Opfer.
Wir sind euer schlechtes Gewissen und wir suchen euch heim.
Wir sind das, was ihr verdrängen wollt. Aber wir gehen nicht mehr weg.
Wir sind kein Freiwill, keine Sklavinnen, keine Kriegsbeute und keine Kollateralschäden. Wir sind die Töchter Europas.
Wir sind die Töchter Europas.
Wir sind die Töchter Europas. Wir sind die Töchter Europas.
Why do some people claim to love Western culture, love Western civilization and Western accomplishments, yet at the same time claim to not care if the distinct people from which those accomplishments sprang forth disappear? Do they honestly believe that all the wonder and majesty that fills our great cities and nations had nothing to do with the people that built them? When the mighty Aztec people perished, when they withered and died, so did their culture and traditions and civilization. I understand the link between race and culture. Race and culture, two things that are central to any nationalist's belief systems, two things that we must preserve, and two things that are both normal and natural to love and cherish and wish to uphold and protect. Race and culture are intrinsically linked, but now we are seeing the rise of those who claim to stand in defence of the West and Western culture, but who curiously deny this link, who want to defend one, but at the same time will not mention the other, often choosing to scorn those who do. These people wish to divorce race and culture and claim that Western culture and all of its magnificent achievements, all of its awe-inspiring history and all of its world-changing innovations are not actually the product of a distinct and individual people, a people who have the right not only to self-determination but a right to their ancestral homelands. To claim race and culture are not in fact linked is madness, just as each race is a product of their environment and the way that environment shaped those people over many millennia. Culture is a product of the people that created it. So just as Europe, our sacred lands, gave birth to our forefathers, Africa gave birth to the African and the Far East to the Oriental, and the different environments that those people developed in shaped and moulded those people over many tens of thousands of years. Those different environmental pressures caused different tribes and races to develop different traits that came to define them as people. And those different traits are expressed in the cultures that sprang forth from those people. And when you look around the world, when you look at the achievements and cultures of different people, they differ greatly. They differ in terms of art, literature, song, dance, technology, architecture and cuisine. But they are all a reflection of the people who created them, a testament to those people and an expression of who those people are, who they were, and where they came from. And let us not mince our words. Those people are quite simply Europeans. These are our lands. This is our heritage. And ultimately, the destiny of our culture lies in our hands. Do not bow your head. Do not be ashamed to speak the truth. Be proud of who you are, of who your forefathers were. Rise up, Western man. It is time you reclaimed your heart and your bravery. It is time you stood up in defence of what is rightfully yours.
What is Western civilization? Western civilization is a particular civilization which is reared in Europe, north, south, east and west, which is expressed through elites and through individual moments of genius, particularised in particular lives, but that can only be so because of the mass of people that these individuals are drawn from. Why are people proud that Shakespeare is an Englishman? They're proud that he's an Englishman, whether they've opened any of his plays whatsoever at school when they were forced to do them and so on, because he's felt to embody a national consciousness, and he's felt to speak for many who didn't speak and who couldn't speak. And people are proud that they have somebody like him in their national trajectory, whether they're interested in his work or not. Self-pride is very emblematic of an ethnic sense of purpose and also a joie de vivre in relation to this life. If you strip that out and take it away from people, they lose something. They lose spirit. They become morbid and depressed. Everyone needs great cultural icons, whether they're interested in them or not. They are part of the fabric that gives an individual life some sort of meaning. Increasingly, many individuals in this society do not have an overall or an individual meaning. That's why they live moment to moment and day to day in relation to contingency and consumption. The point of great civilization, as expressed in great art, is to raise people out of that particular trough and get them, if only momentarily, looking upwards towards the sky, looking upwards towards higher forms, looking upwards towards the prospect of archetypal forms, looking upwards towards the religions of the past, the present and the future, looking upwards towards God or the gods, or the idea that they might be there, or the idea that it might be necessary that they're there, even if you don't think that they are. That's the point of great civilization. That's the point of great work. That's the point of great art. Most of it only exists in the past now, or exists as a circular moment in time, whereby these great works are reinterpreted in the present. But nothing is forever. And I'm quite certain that great works are being written now, are being performed now in the minds of certain individuals, are being conceptualised now, but they don't have an outwork at this time. If a people cannot affirm itself through great works, it begins to die, whether or not people have any interest in those great works themselves. Maoists and extreme communists believe that all humans are a white sheet of paper. Any sexuality, any ethnic specification, any culturalisation, any level of intellect can be pre-programmed into you. Because if you notice, the dip in biological thinking in the middle of the 20th century, as a reaction to the Second World War, is the high point for these type of New Left ideas. They're radically opposed to the idea of the biological investigation of the building blocks of life, because it will lead to the possibility of acceptance by the masses of a prior essentialism. Men and women in all groups are 80% inherited, at least. 80% generic, 80% genetic, 80% hereditarian. And the socialised element, the naturalising, normative element, where we're reared through parents, the psychology that we're into, relationship that we have with them, we're culturalised through education and through behaviourism in a society, that's 20%. And even that is ecology, which is a species of biology. Everyone knows ecology is a subject area within biology. It's almost as if the 20%, which is actually given by naturalisation, that which is nurture rather than nature, to use old-fashioned formulations from the 1960s, is actually part and parcel of nature itself. Because who sets us up and what sets us up and primes us to be naturalised as human beings, if not nature itself? Race is culture and culture is race, essentially. Everything that exists has to come out of something which existed before it, and it has to have a primal root. It has to have a foundation. It has to be racinated, to use Sigmund Weil's term. It has to come from some egg or some implantation of self which gives birth to it. Because what they're frightened of is too much authentication. What they're frightened of is too much cultural affirmation. Because if things are culturally affirmed in a prior or identitarian sort of a way, they're conceived to be too white or too European or too or too fascistic or too dangerously tribal.
This week on Book Notes, our guest is Charles Murray, sociologist and fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. He joins us to discuss his recent book, The Bell Curve, Intelligence and Class Structure in American Life.
Charles Murray, co-author of the book, The Bell Curve. Where does that title come from?
Erwin Glickus, the editor at Free Press, came to us one day and he said, you know, the whole book is about this distribution and this change. What about the bell curve as a title? And Dick Ernstein and I heard it, and it was one of those cases where we said, yeah, that's a wonderful title.
What's it mean?
It refers to that picture on the front of the book. It looks like a bell, and it's a phenomenon you see in all kinds of things in nature, whether it's height or weight or, in this case, IQ. Things distribute themselves so that you get most people in the middle, and you get a few people out on each end, and the book is about the people on each end.
When do otherwise reasonable and intelligent people deny facts of reality? Well, when those facts clash with pre-existing emotions, desires, religious convictions, or ideological commitments. Let's consider IQ denialism. Because IQ is a highly heritable human trait that isn't distributed equally within or between populations, IQ science provokes denialist reactions.
German psychologist William Stern used revisions of Binet and Simone's work to create the famous intelligence quotient, or IQ measurement.
Race is a product of evolution. Many thousands of years in seclusion in separate climates begot the races of the world. Over time, our ancestors have successfully adapted to their surrounding conditions. All humans have genetic traits that either completely or heavily dictate visible, physical, and mental aspects of themselves. The obvious traits that are entirely due to genetics are visible traits we see, such as hair type, eye color, skin color, and even bone structure. However, many physical and mental aspects of a person are heavily, if not entirely, influenced by genetics as well. The existence and caliber of these non-external traits can only be determined through scientific testing. Our scientific methods answer the questions our eyes cannot. It is important to note that all traits have variability within the human species, within each race, and certainly across all races. A trait of one person will likely be similar to that of another person, although also not the same. This phenomena gives us similarity and at the same time non-conformity at a decaying rate. If we measure the height of many men and many women, we get a distribution that looks like this. This height distribution clearly shows the average man is taller than the average woman. This natural shape often represents variability in nature. Social scientists often call this the bell curve, due to its bell-like shape. To break it down more, the average white man is taller than the average Asian man. This is due to genetic differences between these races. The purpose of focusing on high IQ is due to the importance of having high IQ individuals to sustain infrastructure and create progress in society.
So I went to South Africa essentially in search of a high IQ African population. So I searched for a top university within Johannesburg. Some of my colleagues were arguing and saying, look, we know there are many top African students at Harvard and Berkeley and Stanford or Oxford and Cambridge in England, or even at top-notch universities in South Africa. Boy, if you could only test their IQs, you'd find that they were just as bright or almost as bright as the genius level physicists in North America. We had Africans and Cape Coloreds as well as our assistants. What we did, we had 300 first-year undergraduate psychology students, half of whom were black and half of whom were white, and we paid them $10 US for taking part. We had a huge exam hall, and so they couldn't possibly read each other's answers. It was proctored and monitored by 5 of our assistants. I myself prowled up and down these rows, looking and making sure that everybody did the test studiously. The African scores peak considerably lower down than do the white scores. In fact, the average Africans get 44 out of 60 correct, whereas the whites got 54 out of 60 correct. Now, 44 out of 60 correct is roughly, according to the norms of the test, what a 14-year-old junior high school student in America gets. And these are first-year university students. Putting it into an IQ context, getting 44 out of 60 correct is an IQ of 84. An IQ of 84 is substantially higher, it's about a standard deviation higher than an IQ of 70, which is the African population. But it implies that since most university students are one standard deviation higher than the average, and the university students have 84, then the average for the South African population as a whole must be about 70.
If you believe in different genetic ancestors, childbearing patterns, evolution, among other factors in group development, why do we persist in the notion that all groups, on average, are the same when it comes to intelligence? It makes no logical sense that groups can evolve to be completely different in terms of physical externalities, but be completely the same on average when it comes to the brain. And it is not backed up by any statistics that all groups on average are the same. However, the impact of intelligence also varies within groups to such a degree that we cannot treat individuals differently based on appearance, at least on a personal level. Yet Sam Harris, one of the most rational voices on the center left, and his opener to his conversation with IQ researcher Charles Murray, confirms that these are facts.
What we have here is a set of nested taboos. Human intelligence itself is a taboo topic. People don't want to hear that intelligence is a real thing, and that some people have more of it than others. They don't want to hear that IQ tests really measure it. They don't want to hear that differences in IQ matter, because they're highly predictive of differential success in life. And not just for things like educational attainment and wealth, but for things like out-of-wedlock birth and mortality. People don't want to hear that a person's intelligence is in large measure due to his or her genes, and that there seems to be very little we can do environmentally to increase a person's intelligence, even in childhood. It's not that the environment doesn't matter, but genes appear to be 50 to 80% of the story. People don't want to hear this. And they certainly don't want to hear that average IQ differs across races and ethnic groups. Now, for better or worse, these are all facts. In fact, there is almost nothing in psychological science for which there is more evidence than these claims.
Joining me today is the author of The Art of the Argument, Western Civilization's Last Stand, and the host of Free Domain Radio, Stefan Molyneux. Welcome to the Rubin Report.
Thank you. Great pleasure to be here.
All right, well, we have a lot to get to, and I really want to talk about the book, but I thought the best way to sort of start this is that I know I'm going to get a certain amount of hate just for sitting across from you. And as I said, I've been on your show a couple times before, and we've had nothing but pleasant conversations and have talked about liberalism and logic and reason and all that stuff. But I think you're somewhat aware of that type of thing, that for some people you're
negative opinions about a free thinker on the internet. I think actually pre-internet it was Socrates and then Copernicus, not to put myself in such lofty categories, but there certainly is when you are an original thinker and when you really try and, particularly when you scrub things down to the bare minimum, like René Descartes said, like, what if I know nothing whatsoever? What if I just wipe everything out and try and build a coherent and rational framework of thinking and of understanding the world and of understanding ethics? What if I just pretend I know nothing, which is a Socratic commandment, you know nothing? What are you going to build from scratch? And I think that's the modern world, is when people said, we don't know anything. We don't know whether the sun or the earth is the center of the solar system. We don't know anything. Let's just pretend we know nothing. We don't even know if the king is put there by God. We don't know if the aristocracy is put there by God. We don't know if the priests are right about everything. What if we just wipe the slate clean and then we build things up and we get modern civilization, I think, out of that? But there are a lot of entrenched interests that profit from existing error. And when people come along with better arguments, well, it can be a little controversial.
It can be a little controversial.
So the U.S. Army, for over 100 years, has been giving more or less IQ tests to people to figure out whether they're sort of officer material or, grunt material, so to speak. And what they noticed was between blacks and whites, and this becomes this bichromatic nonsense because the question of ethnicity and IQ is a whole layer cake. Just very briefly, the very top, the Ashkenazi Jews, this is the Jews that are the wandering Jews, so to speak, the Ashkenazi Jews, the science is like 115 IQ on average, but lower on spatial reasoning and higher, like even higher than 115 IQ on verbal stuff, right? I mean, verbal acuity among Ashkenazi Jews is through the roof and it's the highest recorded that there is. And then under that you have, I don't know, the word Oriental has kind of come out of favor, which is kind of annoying in a way because how do you differentiate people from India, people from sort of East Asians, whatever, the Chinese, Japanese, and so on. 103, 104, 105 IQ in general, very high on spatial reasoning, which is why, software engineers, other kinds of engineers, you see that, like Google has this, it's like 40% or something like that of their engineers are
not
East
much
Asian.
More, because after this diversity thing goes through, they're going to just have to pick everybody by color and all that nonsense.
But this is the thing, right? So if you're looking at East Asians with very high spatial IQ, they're going to be, quote, overrepresented in those engineering fields and so on, but not because everyone who's got that IQ is up there. There just happen to be more of those, right? You've got your run-of-the-mill vanilla Caucasians coming in at 100. And 100 is just, I don't know, it's just the baseline. They recalibrate it from time to time and so on. And then below, some of this, what are mestizos or Hispanic sometimes called, although that's a very loosey-goosey term. And that's sort of 85, 90, and so on. And then you've got blacks in North America, particularly African Americans coming in at 85, and there's been some upward drift a little bit. And then below that, you start to get sub-Saharan blacks at 70. There are pygmies in the high 50s, low 60s. There are the indigenous people of Australia, I think, in the low 60s. And some of these numbers, again, I don't have them all tattooed on my wrist or anything. But so there is this range. It is unbelievably heartbreaking. I mean, just I'm straight up about all of this. Like, this is one of the most difficult facts I've ever had to absorb in my life. I mean, I've gone through a bunch of iterations as a thinker. I was a Christian and a socialist and all. I mean, I won't go through a whole journey. But I found almost nothing harder to absorb than this question of differences in IQ between groups. And this goes back many, many decades. This was talked about by Herrnstein in Murray, of course, in the bell curve in 94. And nobody's been able to overturn that. Do you know how much I would give, Dave, to know that it was just racism? because that's a solvable problem. And people have been working on trying to solve the problem of racism, well, for hundreds of years. I mean, it is, I mean, I wouldn't say I give my left arm because I'm left-handed, but I would give a lot.
Lefty too.
I would give so much for it to just be racism.
But how many murders, do you not have a rough idea of how many blacks kill other blacks?
I don't have those numbers.
I think it's 6,000 a year. I mean, there's one a day in East New York.
Know.
If you look at the data, well, I'm afraid blacks are raping wildly disproportionately to their representation in the population. I mean, if you look at the number of white men who rape black women and the number of black men who rape white women, it's startling.
What are those numbers? Do you have them?
I don't have them on me, but the white men who rape white women is so inconsequential, it's hard to quantify. It's something like 8. And then the black men who rape white women is in the hundreds. So the reason whites are doing well is because we cheated.
Yeah.
But if you look at the data of Asians, for example, you will find way more Asian privilege than there is white privilege. Asians make way more money than whites. They're way more educated than whites. They are less likely to experience any kind of crime than whites are. They're less likely to die at work than whites are. I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah, they suffer from a different sort of racial stereotyping.
Well, they don't suffer. They're kicking our ass. Everything you can say about white privilege is more true with Asian privilege. No one grabs their purse when
pigeonholes them.
Pardon?
It still pigeonholes them.
Pigeonholes them as successful? I don't think anyone minds being pigeonholed like that. Hey, Mr. Successful, why don't you go drive a nice car?
It's not near as harmful as how black folks are stereotyped, certainly.
Okay, so why don't you start at the top then, and let's try to dismantle Asian privilege.
Asian privilege, I wouldn't call it Asian privilege.
Well, it fits all the criteria of white male privilege.
What do you mean by that?
They get better jobs. They get better educations. No one sees them as threatening. Everything that you can say that whites cheated to get is more prevalent in an Asian society. Okay, let's drop that, I guess. You see, the dominant narrative is your sticker. The dominant narrative in America is white people are evil, white people suck, we should be ashamed of ourselves. And
I don't think we should be ashamed of ourselves. I think that we should take responsibility for the system that we've created.
The best system in the world?
Oh, we do not have the best system in the world.
Who has a better system?
There are many European countries that are much better off than us.
Oh, you mean like the European countries with a higher density of whites, like Northern Europe?
That's one way to phrase it, I guess.
You don't mean Turkey.
No.
You don't mean Eastern Europe
No.
with the communists. So the only time you can come up with a system that's better than America, it's a country that's more white than America. I don't understand.
When black people see the world, I don't care. You can train them. You can train a black man to be a physician. You can train him to be an astrophysicist. You can train him to be a lawyer, but you can't train him to understand the world. He doesn't know. I'm telling you. There's not 2 cents worth of difference between a mass murderer. There's not 2 cents of difference between a petty thief that's locked away in prison than a black doctor when it comes to understanding the world. Listen, had Africa, that big old continent over there, they never built one boat that was seaworthy. Not one. There's not one monument in Africa, in all of Africa. There are no great cities that were built. Even before the first colonization of white people coming to the shores of Africa or the slave ships, black men built nothing.
story of a city seeking new horizons in a resolute contest with great challenges. That city is Detroit, home of nearly 2 million people. I am honored to be serving as mayor at this most eventful and productive period in Detroit's history. And I'm honored to be a participant in the Detroit story.
Detroit is now the largest U.S. city to file for bankruptcy.
Detroit cannot manage itself. It can't meet its payroll.
We're at the end of the road. We can't borrow any more money.
What happened? Detroit was once prosperous. Now it's such a wreck that...
For $1,500 you could buy this house.
Right. For years, politicians promised they would fix Detroit.
Detroit shall again become the great city that is its destiny.
But instead...
They turned City Hall into a den of bribes and kickbacks, making themselves rich.
Is there hope for places like Detroit?
We are going to turn around the city of Detroit.
This is the Motor City. And this is what we do.
What's up with Detroit? And can this happen to your town?
Detroit was once the richest city in America. I was 3 years old then. That was in 1950. Now it's the biggest U.S. city ever to declare bankruptcy. So what happened? Detroit was perpetually on fire. What do you mean?
We have 7,000 arsons a year. Do the math. What is that? 30 a day? And we have a fire department where the alarms don't work inside. There's holes in the boots. The engines leak water. Sometimes the engines show up and can't pump water. That's not the fault of the... Go ahead.
They took out the fire poles, sold the brass.
Sold them, scrapped them. They did. Everything. Gone. Everything now is up for sale.
Police, I called them an hour ago and they have still not gotten here.
They got the TV, the game machine, the laptop. 1.5 hours and still no cops. Cops arrive 4 hours later. And they say they came as soon as they were assigned the call.
I break out crying for no reason at all. But I believe that's depression and being so afraid here.
The last house, the last story. You've got bars on the inside of your house.
Yes.
It's Mary's life of locks. Lock after lock, another layer of protection after they broke down the bars. The only thing she doesn't have is a moat. She locked the front door when we went in and unlocks us to get out.
In a matter of 2 summers, this has happened. October 2nd, 2006.
That's when she lost her job and the last neighbors fled. In 2 years, how many times have you called 911?
I would say approximately 30. I can't even look at this because it hurts so bad.
She's now on a waiting list for senior housing, maybe by summer. A bunch of maybes is all she's got.
You survived, you made it. Now you're telling me people with disability cannot be leaders?
The president of the Detroit School Board is taking his licks for being unable to write a sentence that makes sense. His emails were published in the Detroit News and Free Press.
We need to do our due diligence also.
They can sue you. I voted no.
Excuse me, Madam Councilmember Watson. I'm tired of you interrupting me. You interrupted me on bamboozled and you interrupted me now. Everybody knows how you stood, and you don't have to keep interrupting me because I'm not disrespectful to you like that.
Colleagues, President Pro Tem does have the floor.
Could you answer my question, please?
Interruptions, please.
Yes, I can. You're doing your due diligence presently,
We all know that murder is against the law.
You attacked me, and I didn't attack you.
I have the floor.
We know you do, but I said based upon his years.
I have the floor, President Pro Tem. I don't want to hear you anymore.
And you don't have to hear me. We don't have to hear you.
Then be quiet because I'm speaking and I'm asking a question.
You do that at home, not here.
I'm not your father, but I am the president, and right now I have the floor.
Because I'm tired of that. Be respectful. You may not do that at home, but you're going to do it up in here.
Stop interrupting.
You grow up.
internet quote that goes, "Guys don't know how to treat girls anymore." I would say that guys and girls don't know how to treat each other anymore. And there are many reasons for that. Is there anything guys don't get blamed for these days? Seriously, everything. Women's issues, family issues, national issues, it doesn't matter what it is, it's always men. It seems like the thing to be is offended by something these days. Everything's offensive to someone, isn't it? You know, in the age of tolerance, everyone is more offended than ever. Personally, I'm offended by the term empowerment. It implies that I am lacking something on my own. I'm not good enough the way God made me. I don't need the National Organization for Women to tell me that I'm of worth as a human being. I don't need them. I don't need feminists to make me feel decent about myself, to boost my confidence. I don't need a successful career even to feel fulfilled as a woman. Leadership is a masculine trait. I know, that's not being taught anymore. Nobody, the public school system has successfully convinced women that leadership is not a gender quality. It's something that anyone can do. It's something that women should especially be doing. I'm not saying a woman can't lead, but leadership is inherently a masculine trait. So what is feminism anyway? Because there seems to be a great confusion, a great misunderstanding between people as to what it actually is. And what it was and what it is are two different things. And then what it is and what it is being sold as are two different things as well. Let me first say that feminism is not about women's rights or equal opportunity. Feminism is now merely a tool of the liberal, read socialist, agenda. In order to fully understand how the socialists have hijacked the feminist movement, you need to understand that socialism and communism is not dead. There's not a lot of talk about communism anymore. The Red Scare of the 50s seems to be over. That's because it's been repackaged. It's being sold as something else. Exact same goals, exact same ideologies, exact same philosophies, different name. Political correctness is cultural Marxism. That's not insane to say. That's not wacko. That's not a little extreme. It's a fact. Cultural Marxism has been repackaged and sold to the culture as political correctness because no one will accept, at least most of the country will not accept Marxism under that label. But they will if you call it political correctness. Call it something else, people swallow it whole. There is a definite war against men. And the goal is to make men obsolete. It sickens me even to say it.
I have a question for you. If a nation can be convinced to permit the genocide of its own future, the innocent lives of their unborn, are there any evils that they could not be convinced of? Think about it. Think about the evils we face in this country today. Communism, the sexual exploitation of children, child drag queens, rampant pornography, the promotion of homosexuality, the hatred for the white male and Christians, the push for open borders. Why is anybody surprised anymore by any of these things? The answer is no. There is nothing that you could not convince a population that murders its own children. There is no evil you could not convince them of through massive social engineering. We mass murder the unborn and call it healthcare. Sick institutions create sick people, create a sick country, and that's where we live. Gosh. So, here's a clip of the New York State Senate chamber celebrating the Reproductive Health Act. They clap for genocide under the guise of women's rights, and people buy into this, that women have some right to end a life that inconveniences them, their own child, in what is probably the most extreme expression of selfishness in the history of humanity. There are two types of abortionists, pro-abortion, pro-choice, whatever you want to call it. There are the uneducated and there are the sick. And let me tell you, the people who are drafting these laws, the people who are performing these procedures, they are not uneducated. They know firsthand what abortion is all about.
I'll now begin by introducing today's witnesses. The first witness is Dr. Anthony Levatino. Dr. Levatino is a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist. Over the course of his career, Dr. Levatino has practiced obstetrics and gynecology in both private and university settings, including as an associate professor of OBGYN at the Albany Medical College. And Dr. Levatino, we'll begin with you. Welcome.
Second trimester D&E abortions performed between roughly 14 and 24 weeks of gestation. Your patient today is 17 years old. She's 22 weeks pregnant. Her baby is the length of your hand plus a couple of inches. And she's been feeling her baby kick for the last several weeks, but she's asleep on an operating room table. You walk into that operating room scrubbed and gowned, and after removing laminaria, you introduce a suction catheter into the uterus. This is a 14 French suction catheter. If she were 12 weeks pregnant or less, basically the width of your hand or smaller, you could basically do the entire procedure with this. But babies this big don't fit through catheters this size. After suctioning the amniotic fluid out from around the baby, you introduce an instrument called a Sofer clamp. It's about 13 inches long. It's made of stainless steel. The business end of this clamp is about 2.5 inches long and 1/2 inch wide. There are rows of sharp teeth. This is a grasping instrument. When it gets a hold of something, it does not let go. A D&E procedure is a blind abortion, so picture yourself introducing this and grabbing anything you can blindly and pull, and I do mean hard, and out pops a leg about that big, which you put down on the table next to you. Reach in again, and pull out an arm about the same length, which you put down on the table next to you. And use this instrument again and again to tear out the spine, the intestines, the heart and lungs. Head on the baby that size is about the size of a large plum. Can't see it, but you pretty good idea you've got it if you've got your instrument around something and your fingers are spread about as far as they go. You know you did it right if you crush down on the instrument and white material runs out of the cervix. That was the baby's brains. Then you could pull out skull pieces. And you have a day like I had a lot of times, sometimes a little face comes back and stares back at you. Congratulations, you just successfully performed a second trimester D&E abortion. You just affirmed her right to choose. For the first time in my life, I really looked at that pile of body parts on the side of the table. And I didn't see her wonderful right to choose, and I didn't see all the money I just made. All I could see was somebody's son or daughter. And I stopped doing late-term abortions after that, and several months later stopped doing all abortions.
Let's say, a white woman presented to you and told you that she was going to undergo an abortion because she or her husband did not want to have a girl. Would you perform that abortion?
That's a great question. I've never come across that scenario.
But if you did,
I can't say.
But if you did,
it's their choice, and I don't have to make that decision for them. I'm not the police, right? I am going to go along with a woman to allow her to make the decision that's right for her family, and my job is to trust them.
So if you present, I know this is hypothetical, you've never encountered the situation, but if a woman presented with that reason for undergoing the abortion, you would do the abortion. Is that what you're saying?
I am willing to do whatever the woman needs to have done to make sure that she's getting the care that she needs.
Romney's attack and Trump's response this morning on Twitter are the latest salvos in a long-standing personal feud between the two men. It's even possible that Romney is planning to challenge Trump for the Republican nomination in 2020. Romney spent the bulk of his business career at a firm called Bain Capital. Bain Capital all but invented what is now a familiar business strategy: take over an existing company for a short period of time, cut costs by firing employees, run up the debt, extract the wealth, and move on, sometimes leaving retirees without their earned pensions. Romney became fantastically rich doing this. Meanwhile, a remarkable number of the companies are now bankrupt or extinct. This is the private equity model. A ruling class sees nothing wrong with it. It's how they run the country. Mitt Romney refers to unwavering support for a finance-based economy and an internationalist foreign policy as the mainstream Republican view. And he's right about that. For generations, Republicans have considered it their duty to make the world safe for banking, while simultaneously prosecuting ever more foreign wars. Modern Democrats generally support those goals enthusiastically. There are signs, however, that most people do not support this agenda, and not just here in America. In countries around the world, France, Brazil, Sweden, the Philippines, Germany, many others, voters suddenly are backing candidates and ideas that would have been unimaginable just a decade ago. These are not isolated events. What you're watching is entire populations revolting against leaders who refuse to improve their lives. Something like this has been happening in our country for the past 3 years. Donald Trump rode a surge of popular discontent all the way to the White House. At some point, Donald Trump will be gone. The rest of us will be gone too. The country will remain. What kind of country will it be then? How do we want our grandchildren to live? Those are the only questions that matter. The answer to them used to be obvious. The overriding goal for America is more prosperity, meaning cheaper consumer goods. But is that still true? Does anyone still believe that cheaper iPhones or more Amazon deliveries of plastic garbage from China are going to make us happy? They haven't so far. A lot of Americans are drowning in stuff, and yet drug addiction and suicide are depopulating large parts of the country. Anyone who thinks the health of a nation can be summed up in GDP is an idiot. The goal for America is both simpler and more elusive than mere prosperity. It's happiness. There are a lot of ingredients in being happy: dignity, purpose, self-control, independence, above all, deep relationships with other people. Those are the things that you want for your children. They're what our leaders should want for us and would want if they cared. But our leaders don't care. We are ruled by mercenaries who feel no long-term obligation to the people they rule. They're day traders, substitute teachers. They're just passing through. They have no skin in this game, and it shows. They can't solve our problems. They don't even bother to understand our problems. This is negligence on a massive scale. Both parties ignore the crisis in marriage. Our mindless cultural leaders act like it's still 1961. And the biggest problem American families face is that sexism is preventing millions of housewives from becoming investment bankers or Facebook executives. For our ruling class, more investment banking is almost always the answer. They teach us it's more virtuous to devote your life to some soulless corporation than it is to raise your own kids. And by the way, if you really loved your fellow Americans, as our leaders should, it would break your heart to see them high all the time, which they are. A huge number of our kids, especially our boys, are smoking weed constantly. You may not realize that because new technology has made it all but odorless, but it's everywhere. And that's not an accident. Once our leaders understood they could get rich from marijuana, marijuana became ubiquitous. In many places, tax-hungry politicians have legalized or decriminalized it. Former Speaker of the House John Boehner now lobbies for the marijuana industry. His fellow Republicans seem fine with that. Oh, but it's better for you than alcohol, they tell us. Maybe. Who cares? Talk about missing the point. Try having dinner with a 19-year-old who's been smoking weed. The life is gone. Passive, flat, trapped in their own heads. Do you want that for your kids? Of course not. Then why are our leaders pushing it on us? You know the reason. Because they don't care about us. When you care about people, you do your best to treat them fairly. Our leaders don't even try. So the question is, what kind of country do you want to live in? Well, a fair country, a decent country, a cohesive country, a country whose leaders don't accelerate the forces of change purely for their own profit and amusement, a country you might recognize when you're old, a country that listens to young people who don't live in Brooklyn, a country where you can make a solid living outside of the big cities, a country where Lewiston, Maine seems almost as important as the west side of Los Angeles, a country where environmentalism means getting outside and picking up the trash, a clean, orderly, stable country that respects itself. And above all, a country where normal people with an average education who grew up no place special can get married and have happy kids and repeat unto the generations. A country that actually cares about families, the building block of everything.